I think the terminology in the market has confused matters, and I see fiduciary management as being a catch-all for a greater degree of delegation by trustees to another party. I do like to think of it, however, as encompassing the whole liability side of things as well as the assets, rather than just a growth asset mandate or something like that. I like to think of it in terms of holistically looking at dealing with the assets and liabilities together.
Yeah. So an overall management solution.
Yeah, and there's different ways of doing it, but I don't think we should get hung up on the name of what we call it. It doesn't matter what we call it, it's what actually happens in practice that matters, what trustees choose to buy and what help they acquire from their fiduciary manager.
I would completely agree. I think the industry has actually confused people by having the names that it does, whether we call it fiduciary, delegation, implemented consulting, solvency management. They're all sort of different flavours of the same thing. And I think another very valid point is that it should encompass the liabilities, and it should be a asset and liability solution, not just a asset solution. And I think on the point of delegation, there are differences as to the degree of delegation. I think for some fiduciary mandates, it's much more akin to an advisory nature, where it's proactive advisory work that the consultant or fund manager is giving and providing, up to the point of actually complete delegation within permitted boundaries and how wide those boundaries are.
It's good to see that we've gotten to this point actually so far. I'm kind of prejudging what I might hear after this, but it is about a holistic solution to manage all assets relative to the liabilities, in relation to the liabilities. Now, what your powers are as a fiduciary manager in terms of decision making with respect to the assets, that's something that different providers will have different types of solutions. Some, like us, provide a lot of flexibility there. It can be advisory, it can be monitoring certain parts of the portfolio with delegated decision making in other parts of the portfolio. So that's where perhaps the confusion comes in, but I find the confusion point a bit like being confused about a Volvo and a Vauxhall and a Volkswagen. There are three different cars, but they're all cars. And I think that's where the different flavors come in. I think it is valuable, though, to have this discussion because late last year KPMG came out with a survey in the fiduciary management market, and it was their second survey. And they realized that actually a lot of mandates were being called fiduciary management mandates, whereas in fact they were only for perhaps the alternatives part, which brings it really into a kind of a multi-manager type of solution. Nothing wrong with multi-management, but it's not. It's very different from fiduciary.
This is their point about partial and full delegation.
Yeah, although I find the term full delegation really confusing because in many cases fiduciary management leads to less delegation. If you look at in many cases, in the traditional solution, trustees end up delegating huge amounts of discretion to underlying managers. With a fiduciary manager in place, you actually potentially have a framework to pull some of that delegation back where it's not appropriate. So full delegation I find really confusing, and it's perhaps the solution that ends up being suitable for the smaller end of the market, but that's only because the schemes are so small they can't afford to have a more customized solution. But fiduciary management should not be equated with full delegation. That leads to confusion.
Yes, I think it's true to say that from a trustee's point of view, you're looking at a solution that comes to some extent drawing different aspects together, and that's the advantage, that you're going not quite one shop, but you're certainly going to a situation whereby you're dealing with one set of people covering a number of different functions. And I think that's really the advantage from a trustee point of view. And as has been said earlier, it does bring this question of looking at assets and liabilities together, rather than, as previously was the case, you tended to look at these in separate ideas. And also, of course, you can bring the actuarial profession into this as well, so that all your advisors are working together in a much more cohesive and, as you say, holistic way. So I think that's really the main definition that is distinctive from, should we say, more traditional way of operating with advisors.
So at your scheme, do you have is it about assets and liabilities, the kind of model that Anne was talking about at the beginning, or is
yes,
it? Yes,
yes,
it's the full suite.
And of course, again, in terms of reporting, which I'm sure we'll cover later on, but in terms of reporting, you're looking at the whole picture. So often trustees are misled by seeing that assets perform well, but the liabilities can grow even greater, and therefore they face a situation at the end of a period of finding they're in a worse situation in terms of bringing the whole thing together in the funding position than they thought they would be with very good performance on the asset side.
Yeah, I broadly agree with the comments made so far, that it is about focus on the total funding ratio of the scheme, assets and liabilities, and the integration of the risks that drive the funding ratio. Sometimes I get a little confused by the delegation side. For me, fiduciary management has to include integrated implementation of the investments, so that there is a single point of reference for the trustees when they want to take action. I think historically the situation has been that trustees have in effect been in charge of their pension schemes but not in control of their pension schemes because they've lacked integrated implementation capabilities, understanding of the underlying investment problem, focus on funding ratio. And this is the step that I think fiduciary management is seeking to bridge, trying to bring those together. The exact degree to which there's investment delegation is a question that the trustees need to ask themselves. How much power do we want to be handing over? Is it appropriate that we give control of the LDI portfolio, control of the growth portfolio to an external party? And if we do give that control, how much control do we want to give? So there is a spectrum of delegation, but it's the integration of the asset and liabilities and the single point for the trustees to go to enact the implementation, which for me is the core of fiduciary management.